It is the Monday Coding and Compliance Roundtable. I had to be very careful because I almost said something, and I want to be careful. So today I am joined by just Christine, and I don't mean just. I'm joined by the one, the only, or the two and only Christine and Terry.
Yeah. We know how it is.
Yeah, I'm having to rewind that a little bit. Terry and I had an opportunity a little while ago before we went live for us to do our hashtag Terry Tuesday episode that's going to be airing tomorrow. And we are extremely excited about it because it was such a great topic. But I want to say welcome to each and every single one of you. Thank you so much for tuning in, logging on, and hanging out. So the topic is when things are as clear as mud.
Yeah.
And Lord knows the payers give us a lot of mud.
Yeah. I've done something similar on my Codecast, but I thought having Sean in the mix there, we expanded on things I didn't talk about before. So I thought that was a good one.
Yeah. So I'm excited that we are live. We are out on LinkedIn. We are on Facebook. We are on YouTube and X. So with that said, I want to jump straight in. Stephanie, Scott, and Paul are all out and running around doing different things. One's on vacation, one's somewhere else, one's someplace else. So they'll be back with us in 2 weeks when we have our next episode of the Roundtable. But
I was going to say, out saving the world, one compliance program at a time. That sounds so much more fun.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. I don't know. With Paul, you never know. He could be educating the world on 1970s TV series and music. All right. So let's jump straight in because we have a few great topics of conversation. So I want to kick it over to Terry first. And Terry, let's go ahead and jump straight in and let's talk about padding the bill.
I hate to call it that because I know people are going to be like, hey, well, we had to do it, but we have some practices out there, and some are urgent care, some are primary care, some are specialty practices. And we get a lot of questions, all three of us, all six of us, when we're all here. And I'm sure those consultants that listen into the podcast, you get this as well. But there's a lot of times where a patient will come in for a specific problem. Let's just throw out urgent care for a second, because they're likely more of a culprit of this. And let's say the patient's coming in because they fractured their finger, let's say from a baseball injury. They got hit with a ball coming at them. And so they're concerned. They don't know what it is. It's a hurt finger. So they come into the urgent care. They're 18 years old. And the doctor sees them and says, okay, let's take an x-ray. Sure enough, you fractured your finger. Okay, we're going to put a little, cast on that or finger splint. And you're not playing baseball for the next couple of weeks. Okay, follow up with your primary care. And then all of a sudden, as I'm auditing this note, I'm noticing there's diet counseling that's been billed. And I'm like, wait, what? And I look at the BMI of the patient. It's normal. I look at the weight of the patient, which I don't have to do as an auditor. There's no reason for me to look at that. But as a former clinician, I can't help myself. So I look at that and I'm thinking, where did this come in? So I query the physician, said, why are you charging this code? It's a lifestyle medicine code. And they said, well, because it's there. So I'm just like, so basically you're telling a patient who came in for a finger fracture that they look fat to you. So you're going to have a conversation with them about, diet. And I'm not trying to be flip, but I am trying to be, in your face about it. This is wrong. We see patients that are coming in, let's say for a UTI, urinary tract infection, and I see a pulse ox on their finger. I see patients that come in for Christine's favorite one, a splinter, and we see all of a sudden depression screening going on. Does a splinter really make you that depressed? I mean, I don't get it, except that it's increasing or padding your bill, or just basically trying to loosely find revenue where none should extra exist there. And, if you do things right, the revenue is going to come. But when you start to try and filler with things that are unnecessary, not medically necessary for the problem they're coming in for, the presenting, patient. And just because CMS or a payer has thrown some things out saying, guess what we'll pay for now? I'm having such not just anxiety about it, but I'm very concerned with practices that are trying to find this revenue just because they know the visit for the day. They look at the money first instead of what the patient's doing. Christine, the last example I'll give was patient came in because they went to the ER over the weekend. They were out from out of town and they had a feeding tube removed or some kind of tube removed. And they wanted a dressing change at the urgent care. They want to go to the hospital. They were flying back home to a different city. So they went to the urgent care. That's a nurse visit. That's all that is. Doesn't even matter if the doctor saw them. You're just putting on a gauze, cleaning it up, make sure there's no problem. That's what the note said. Said, looks good. We changed the gauze, cleaned it up, and, no big deal. Yeah. But because the PA said, continue your hypertension medication that your primary care doctor told you to take, she billed a level 4. And I was like, even Sean and I have talked about prescription drug management at length. That's just, it's inflating your bill. It's upcoding. It's absolutely a red flag for exposure to an audit. So Christine, take it away on that one.
So I have nothing on the latter, but I do have a different perspective on when they're reporting some of these other services. So one of the things that we do with Medicare providers is we require them to participate in either MIPS or APM. If you're with a Medicare Advantage plan, maybe you're participating in HEDIS. And what I've heard, Terry, is that a lot of providers will say, well, I need to get my measures in, and I don't know when the patient's coming back. Fair enough. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's supporting a billable service. So it might be good medicine that you are checking the patient's BMI and reporting the proper HCPCS code for MIPS purposes. But that doesn't mean that you're going to bill for obesity counseling or weight management, right? So I think providers forget that just because they have committed themselves to certain measures doesn't mean that that's going to give them the opportunity to also create revenue. Sometimes good medicine is good medicine. And at the end of the day, if you're getting your MIPS payment or your APM payment through your ACO or your HEDIS bonuses from your Medicare Advantage, then technically you are getting paid for it. So where do you see that additional revenue is? So I think sometimes, Terry, that providers miss that connection. There's got to be a billable in addition code on top of whatever else it is that we're doing.
Well, and some things are just reportable, maybe as an S code or reportable as a quality measure instead of a chargeable visit. Because one of the things I think they also miss is patients have copays for these things and they complain about it. They say, hey, I came in for my finger splinter. Why are you saying that I'm depressed? They see what that charge is, or they Google it. And they get very upset with their physician, and here come the Yelp reviews. So this doctor tried to overcharge me for something that I didn't come in with. And if you don't think the payers are out there reading those, you're crazy. They don't just read the surveys. Yeah, they do.
I got billed a smoking cessation, and it was documented. Patient does not smoke, advised patient not to smoke. Okay. I don't recall that conversation happening. But here's another problem, not to go down the rabbit hole. But when I called the office, there was no resolution. And when I said, well, then can I speak to the office manager? Not available. Compliance officer, not available. Take your number, call you back. And months of back and forth. And eventually I called the insurance company who pulled the records, and it was documented in the medical record. And long story short, there was no way of unringing that bell. And like you said, I did have an extra financial responsibility for that smoking cessation that honestly, I don't believe ever happened. And I'm not a smoker. So I think that's the bigger problem that we also see with some of these charges that are being added to the bills is there's no running away from it.
Well, and I think also the medical assistants out there, if there's any of you listening to the podcast, you have to keep an eye on what the doctor says we should do while you're here today and what actually happened. because I've seen ear lavages that are billed that never happened. You know, I've seen mole removals where they said, you know, we really should look at that, and maybe we have time today. Do you want that removed? And the patient's like, not today. But as soon as they said, do you want that removed, the medical assistant walks out of the room, goes to get a setup, and the patient's gone, but then it still goes into the charge master. And, you know, patient's like, wait, I didn't have that. So
you see that with your analysis that never
yeah,
happened.
UAs that never happened. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Blood that was requested that never happened. Like that happens a lot, Terry.
Yeah. I had a patient that, or the provider that got in trouble because there were a lot of blood draws, like you said, that didn't happen, but the patients were getting in their portal the results. And the patient said, but I didn't have blood drawn. So I'm like,
first scenario to add to that, my poor niece is a college student. So she's just turned 20 and she had to go to the doctor. Her doctor, in-network doctor, referred her to another doctor within the university. And she went to that practice. They verified her benefits. They told her how much her copay was. She goes in the day of the visit. They gave her a paper quote of what her copay was. She paid that copay. The billing went through, came back to her as out of network. Well, what happened was a new doctor joined the practice and she was still in the credentialing process to join that group, but they went ahead and submitted the claim under that doctor and it was processed out of network. And no one will talk to my niece. No one will discuss this with her, that it was out of network. And of course, they charged the 99205. And she walked in and she walked out with no prescription and no referrals. But, you know, and sometimes it's difficult for the patients to even advocate for themselves for these additional charges or erroneous charges or exploited charges, whatever you want to call them. It's difficult for the patients to advocate for themselves once the damage has been done.
Yeah, it's unfortunate too, because I've mentioned this before, even at, you know, the doctor I go to, they try. I know they try, but you know, I've only gone there, I think 6 times in 2 years, and some for just preventative, but for a checkup or whatever, 6 months. And, you know, they've missed a copay that I've paid. They couldn't find it when I paid cash. So obviously I don't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. But they finally found it because I'm like, you know, I hate to say I was acting like a celebrity. Don't you know who I am? I know what you're doing. No. But I kind of made that comment a little bit. You guys don't want to do that. Handed me the
sway them sometimes.
I know.
I'm in compliance, or you know, years in the healthcare industry, and it goes to dead ears. Like I get the blank stare.
Handing me the wrong patient's paperwork. I'm like, this is a HIPAA violation on so many levels. And then of course, my favorite one was when I was in the ER last year, you know, all of a sudden that doctor was not on the list. And I went to a, you know, in-network facility and they said, well, let me find one that is and we'll rebill it. And I was like, oh no. So I guess actually, Sean, this is a good one. So when we all tell people to make sure you've got a compliance module, that shouldn't be in there, right? That if you bill something out with a physician that isn't covered for a patient, you shouldn't go back and find one that is, that didn't see the patient, right?
You know, it's funny, and it's funny that you guys are talking about this and kind of laughing about it. But the scary thing is this
scary way.
Yeah, this happens more frequently than people want to believe. And my guess is there's probably some folks who are listening to us right now, watching us right now, who are saying, well, we've had to do that in my practice. We've done that. What's wrong with that? Or maybe they know what's wrong with that and they're doing it and they're like, uh-oh, they found me out.
Well, Sean, it's not always the provider's fault either. There's one thing, a really big issue with gastro practices. So patient will have a screening colonoscopy, but something's found during the screening and they take out a polyp. Well, the patient in their mind, they went in for a screening, which has no out-of-pocket, has no deductible, no share of cost. But as soon as it turns into a therapeutic or surgical situation, their deductible is still waived, but their 20% kicks in. And they should have been told that prior to, you know, having it done. That's a conversation obviously you have. But the patient will call the insurance company and say, well, they billed it wrong. And then they come back to the practice and say, you billed it wrong. And it's this back and forth bad will now. And the, you know, the payer is just not doing the patient or the provider any good by not understanding the rules that they set up themselves. So it's kind of a mess sometimes.
No, I agree with you 100%. And I think this is the most important thing. If you build for a service for a provider that is not in network and not on the plan, you can't go and build that service under a provider who is. Okay. And we're not going to get into the whole incident to Medicare thing. I'm not talking about that. Bottom line is, if you have a provider on a commercial plan who is not on that plan, they're not on the panel, they're not in network, and a patient was seen by them, and you want to get paid for it, and you're going to do that by billing it under another provider who is in network, you have intentionally submitted a false claim. That is no mas. That is bad. Please don't do that. I think the other thing that's really important that you brought up, Terry, and Christina, I'll come right back to you on this. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I think you brought up, which is really important, is talking about the No Surprise Act. So, you know, if a patient, listen, for the most part, patients who have no healthcare operational knowledge, they don't deal with insurance companies, they don't understand the guidelines, they hear that they're having a preventative screening. And under their benefit with their insurance company, they know they have no deductible, no copayment. But it is up to the provider to say to the patient, there may be a situation that arises during this procedure, and because you are going under twilight anesthesia, or you're going under MAC, or, you know, whatever propofol is considered, I'm not going to be able to talk to you and say, hey, I need you to sign a new form. It doesn't work that way. Now, you know, there may be a provider who says, well, you know, they're unconscious, so what if I put the pen in their hand and I kind of scribble it for them? No, please don't do that. Folks, my recommendation is, for anything that you're going in with the belief that you're doing a screening, but there's the possibility that it could convert to a therapeutic service or a diagnostic service, you should have a waiver of liability or an advanced beneficiary notification signed that says there is a possibility that during the procedure, in the case of GI, if we find a polyp or polyps that have to be removed, this is no longer a preventive service, and your 20% or your copay is going to be applicable. You will be required to pay that. That, to me, is part of the No Surprise Act. But I also say that's part of running a good operation, being operationally sound and being smart, because you are notifying the patient prior to the start of a procedure that if something changes, it's not us who is saying you're responsible, it's your insurance company who's saying you're responsible. Because what will always happen when a patient calls the insurance company and says, I shouldn't have to pay for this, my doctor told me it was a screening. One, most of the people in customer service at an insurance company don't know the rules, because they don't care what the rules are, because they're paid by the hour to do a job. It's not a career. Two, it is the patient needing to understand that the insurance company is always going to play the doctor as the bad guy or gal. And now you're altering potentially the physician-patient relationship. And the sad part is the physician gets the brunt of the complaint, but he or she doesn't even know what the rules are.
Well, you know, Sean, here's the thing. Physicians are very wishy-washy when it comes to this. You're never going to get a physician that's going to sit down and have that type of an in-depth conversation with a patient regarding their billing. Every physician I meet, it just depends on whether it benefits them or not. they're going to say, that's something my front desk takes care of. I just treat the patient. I just doctor. I do the surgery. I do the colonoscopy. I don't get into the whole billing thing until it's time to assign codes. And then suddenly they're all billers because they know exactly what codes they need to be reporting for the services that they performed. So I do think that we're going to have to give them a little more guidance. Like, definitely what you're saying needs to come from the clinical office, but it's part of compliance. It's part of your physician being educated enough to know when to say codes should be assigned by the coder. Administration should take care of financial responsibilities and billing. And then absolutely, doctor, you go doctor. But when we tell you that you can't report that smoking cessation or that PHQ-9 for the splinter, or that, we're going to go ahead and have some sort of an ABN or a waiver placement in process, the doctor needs to not fight with the office to say, yes, I'm right, you're wrong. There needs to be that relationship solidified in every practice. Here's what we do. Here's how we do it. And everybody stay in your lane.
Well, and let me elaborate on that too. So there's something that happens because a lot of times I counsel offices just on this. We talk about, how to deal with this, because too many practices are still doing that no out of pocket, that, insurance only. Oh my gosh, let's go back 40 years. You cannot do that. The contract says once the deductible's met, once the out of pocket's met, then we pay you. If you don't charge it and you don't have permission to waive it, then they don't have to pay you. You just broke the contract or in violation of the contract terms. But, here's the one thing that is going to be really tough as well between physicians and, like Christine said, their administrative staff. One thing that happens a lot of times, and I feel actually bad for some of the providers, patients will come in and they're coming in for a medical problem and they're talking to their providers, and all of a sudden they say, hey, doc, I just lost my job, or this happened and I really can't pay today, or whatever. And there's a little bit of a financial conversation. The doctor is like, oh no. And they're just like, okay, you know what? My staff will deal with that and we'll have them come in at some point and talk to you, or you can call them, just ask the front desk. Well, what the patient heard is, you never have to pay your bill in here again. You and I are on a first name basis. And if you get a bill, just call and yell at my staff. And that's not what the doctor said. What they probably meant in their mind was, today it's fine. Maybe today we can waive your copay, or we'll help you work out a payment plan. The doctor's trying to be compliant. I really believe that, because they don't want to leave money on the table. Most doctors anyway. But I think the one thing that's tough is when the doctors get involved, or the providers get involved with any financial discussion. I always tell the providers, look, we will not treat patients. You don't treat their financial. It's a separate job. And like Christine says, stay in your lane. You have to give us the same respect we're giving you, and have our backs just like we have yours. You do your stuff and we'll do our stuff, and everybody will live a happy life. So you have to just make sure that, if you're a provider out there listening to this, and I know Sean has a lot of providers listening to his different podcasts, you really have to make sure that the people who are experts at their job, just like you, that you let them do their job, because they're the ones that help you with your revenue cycle management. And once you start to get involved, especially in a multi-physician practice where patients sit in the waiting room and talk, oh, my doctor doesn't charge me a copay, but my doctor does. Wow, my doctor waived my whole deductible. What? I had the same surgery. You're kidding me. It just becomes a mess, and payers find out, and you definitely don't want the government to find out you're doing that. And so you have to be very cautious with that. But just in saying a lot of this stuff, especially when, kind of going back to our original conversation about adding charges to the bill, and I know we kind of got on a topic of NSA, the No Surprise Act, and kind of a little bit skewed, but when the patients can't be surprised. Basically, that's the bottom line. They can't be surprised if they're out of pocket. That we have always said a good compliance policy manual plan says that you have financials discussed with the patient prior to having their, whatever they need. Even before they come in for their first office visit, they need to know to bring their checkbook, or they need to know to bring a credit card, or know what they need to bring. I know I have a $50 copay when I go see my primary care doctor. You just know. And so that should be something the patient's aware of. And then if they're going to be scheduled for a procedure, if they're a cash patient or they're going out of network, you have to discuss with them, and you shouldn't be able to, or you should be able to come within a $400 understanding. Otherwise, you could be in violation of the No Surprise Act of what their out of pocket will be. When it gets in network versus out of network, and out and in network facility versus out network providers, there's a whole other set of rules which we'll not talk about right now. But it's really important to understand that patients have to know what their responsibility is, not just clinically to adhere to medical advice, but financially, as far as what their options are when it comes to paying their share of cost. Kind of got on a tangent there, didn't we?
No. But here's the thing, Terry, you're 1,000% right. One of the things that I do when I go into a practice and they're asking me to look at their revenue cycle, suddenly there is a patient account balance. The AR for patient accounts is massive. It's in the millions sometimes. And I think to myself, how did it get that bad? Because the providers may be the ones that are saying, you don't have to pay your copay today. We're not collecting at the time of service. We're going to go ahead and bill, and then we'll send you a bill for the balance, which again, like you said, was taking us back 40 years. But when you've got that much outstanding in patient balances and you're struggling to maintain your practice, now you've started looking at other billables, right? You're putting yourself in such jeopardy there when it's so unnecessary. Again, let the billing office, let the administrative office handle all the finances for the practice. Providers need to keep that. I'm your doctor. I don't get involved in the finances. The office takes care of all of that. We've got a hardship process that you can go through if it's truly a hardship, but they'll take care of all of that up front. I don't do that. Let me listen to your heart, right? I think that's what we need to remember. And it shows right there. The proof is in the pudding. You go in and take one look today. You out there listening, I challenge you, pull your AR, see what your patient balances are. That's a lot of what the problem is. And that's all I've got to say about that.
Sean's like, I wonder if they're ever going to get done.
No,
Two women and Sean, he probably feels beat up on her, or he's like, I'm surrounded by two women that won't stop talking.
Listen, this is the story of my life. I am surrounded by women in my house, between my wife and when our daughters come over or my granddaughters come over. Occasionally my grandsons will stick up for me, but most of the time they're like, you're on your own, old man. So
I have an important question for you, Sean. It's not even related to the podcast. So you posted when you went on vacation to Alaska, you posted a photo of you and Jill. I've never seen Jill before. I have her number to check on you, when I worry about you and your health.
Yeah.
But I never saw her before. She's beautiful. How did you score that? Just kidding.
Terry, you said the question that we've all been thinking. Jill's amazing.
I'm just joking. You're cute too, Sean. I'm sorry. You guys, Sean is like my younger brother. I have to give him a hard time. But I hope Jill's listening because she's gorgeous. So good for you. She's really smart too. So maybe I should ask her, what were you thinking? No, I'm just kidding. But go.
Yeah, she definitely married down.
You married up, that's for sure.
I married up. She married down. I think her crazy match.
I'm just giving you a hard time. She's a very pretty lady, so I'm sure
she's outstanding. And I will say this, and I'm glad you brought that up. She is a beautiful woman, but internally, she is more beautiful internally than what she is externally. Anyone who has been fortunate enough to get to know my wife and has been blessed to have her as a friend will tell you she is one of the most sincere, kind, sweet, gentle natured people, except when it comes to me, human beings that you will ever meet in your life. And she really is. She was an amazing mother to the kids growing up. She's an amazing grandmother to our grandbabies, and I just kind of follow her lead. I've learned after all these decades now, I just kind of watch and Take her
Well,
lead.
we appreciate Jill for keeping you in line. You know, you have Christine and I and Stephanie here, so
Yeah, she does
just
that.
happy you have
And
somebody in your life to do that as well.
I wasn't gonna say anything, but geez, man, look, you're right. Look, I'm aging. Look at these bags. I don't. I'm
Aren't we
gonna.
all?
And look at
Aren't we
this.
all? Yeah,
Look at
it's
this.
not
And
okay.
okay,
That's
I
so
get. If people are gonna be like in 2 weeks from now, they're gonna be like, "Wow, you look so much younger. What did you
yeah.
do?"
No, they're gonna
I'm
be like,
going to get
what the
Botox.
heck was this compliance conversation? Okay, so Sean, I
All
know
right,
you wanted to bring
we
a
went
couple things
way
up.
off. We
We
went
did,
way off the
sorry.
rails on
Before we
this
do
one.
that,
Okay.
before we go into Sean's, I do have
Oh,
one more thing I wanted to
Kristen.
add about the proposal.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
today is the last day to submit your comments. For those of you
Yes.
that have been waiting or procrastinating, today's the day, my friends. So please make sure before end of day that you submit your comments on the proposal. There's a lot of balls in the air right now. Telehealth is one of them. Terry and I, you know, we are so passionate about telehealth, and I'm devastated about the state of the proposal for telehealth right now. So I need you, my friends, the audience, the listeners, my people, to make sure that you comment today. We're the only ones that can make change.
Yeah, it's true. And I see more and more physicians thinking that their congressmen, their representatives are really going to deal with that. Not in a political year. They've got other things going on right now. So, you know, we've got to be collective as healthcare professionals. And it's not just the providers. You know, we are stakeholders too. Everyone can comment. I don't know if everyone knows that, but if you're a coder, biller, administrator,
Yes.
compliance officer, we all can comment. I've commented on 3 things, mostly telehealth, but a lot of things out there that, you know, I don't want new patient visits on telehealth. I think that's for certain things. I think that's ridiculous for certain things. But it's crazy. You know, the location could change, that kind of stuff. So you really need to get out there and say something. Look at the fee schedule. Look at some of the things. Why do we have people that are not clinicians that are getting a piece of the pie? It's insane how they are just stretching this fee schedule and complain about the reduction. Say something in there going, this needs to be fixed.
But
So
you know, the most important thing that I want to put out there about the proposed changes, okay, is that no matter what happens, we are going to have a new administration. Even if it's Harris and Walz, they're going to pick a new administrator, a new Secretary of Health and Human Services. If it's Trump, you're going to get a new Secretary of Health and Human Services. You're going to get a new administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Yours truly is hoping that I will be tapped to become the new administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services so we can actually fix the program for our seniors. But here's what I will say to you. You got to comment. You've got to get involved, and you've got to engage with your professional associations. Your physicians have to engage with their specialty societies to make certain that they are being heard. Because I can promise you, the lobbyists on Capitol Hill have the ear of the politicians, and it is going to be extremely important that our voices get heard, because the insurance industry is a complete and total disaster right now. And I'm always cautioned by attorneys that I work with on what I say on these podcasts. But the fact of the matter is, I only speak the truth. I don't speak with conjecture. I speak with fact. And the fact is, there is some extremely unethical behavior going on within the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. The use of these contract bounty hunters, the Unified Program Integrity Contractors, the Recovery Audit Contractors, these individuals that are working on contingencies, that are receiving these multi-million-dollar contracts. We're talking $80, $90 million contracts for the UPICs. Okay. They have to be able to demonstrate their worth. And I cannot explain to you how many UPIC investigations I'm being contacted about on almost a weekly basis from law firms around the country that are dealing with this stuff. Christine, I know, is getting hit with these things. I know Terry's hearing about this stuff all the time. But folks, you have got to make certain that your voice is being heard, because I promise you there is a power in numbers. Get out there and respond, engage, get on to these quarterly meetings that they have. Put in, put in questions, raise your concerns, and hopefully the more you do, the more they'll start to listen. Terry, go ahead. I know you got something that you wanted to say.
Sorry, I was on mute. No, I think that it's important too, because with telehealth, and I know we kind of beat that horse to the point where it's like, oh my gosh, they're still talking about telehealth. The problem is that there's Medicare, there's Medicaid, depending on what state you're in, and then there's everyone else, which are all contract to contract to contract. And one thing that Sean and I have talked about, Christine and I have talked about, is that, remember, payers put into place some things during the pandemic. Now, you guys were 4 years out from that. 4 years, okay? So remember, things changed. The payers put some things in because they knew if they didn't, it would be mandated, like a lot of things were back in 2020. So they're like, oh, we'll fix it now before we get in trouble. And so then they put some things in saying, yeah, it's a free for all, do whatever you like. But then in 2021, they're like, wow, that was expensive. You ate into our profits, not even to our revenues, our profits. If you couldn't hate payers any more than you do. And then they basically said, well, we didn't. Then Medicare came out and said, well, we really didn't mean that. If you're in Chicago and, we're in Florida, or the patient's in Florida, we didn't really mean you could do anything. We just meant if the state says you can. And we're like, oh my gosh. So then you've got malpractice concerns, and you've got the audio only stuff where people are absolutely going crazy with. There's so many parts to telehealth, and Christine and I are actually working on a project right now regarding it, that I feel like every time we create anything when it comes to telehealth, or we even research it, as much as we think we know, we learn something else going, oh, I didn't catch that on page 412 of a regulation in this thing. Or Sean, you and I even talked about the other day about how most providers don't have their commercial payer contracts and easily available. They're like, well, I know we have one somewhere when we signed it in 1985. They don't have the newest version. But also, I noticed that in the last couple of years, payers have rescinded a lot of what they did for telehealth. They took away audio only. They took away being able to be in your car. They added telehealth panel physicians, so they can control who you see. There's so many things when it comes to the regulatory efforts. And so not only today's the last day for Medicare, that's what Christine was referring to comment on the Medicare fee schedule, but we're coming into contract season for commercial plans. And what happens if there's another pandemic and you have to pivot again to, everybody using telehealth? Or what happens if you add new providers? Or have you checked in on your malpractice insurance? Are they covering anything you're doing from a virtual perspective? Especially things if you're still doing audio only, which a lot of payers aren't covering. It's not just so much about money. It's also about, are you protected from a malpractice situation? Are you able to do it from a contract definition, from language? And I think people aren't getting updated. We get very complacent with, well, we've been able to do it before, so we should be able to do now. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I mean, you probably don't get too many coding questions, Sean, but I know Christine and I do. I still have people asking me, I can't get consults paid under Medicare. And I'm like, Medicare hasn't paid for consults since 2010. They deleted them out of their fee schedule. They're like, really? I'm like, 14 years ago. So, when you hear stuff like that, you just know people aren't up on their contracts and aren't really looking at that. And then you get into practices. And now, Sean, here's on your side. I know you've heard this, who's in charge of the contracting in the practice? Is it outsourced? Do you have a company that does that for you? Do you have a company that does contracting and credentialing? Two different things, people. Is it in-house? Is your administrator? Is your office manager? Is your provider? Who's in charge of that? Is somebody in your billing office allowed to have a conversation with that? I always think you should bring in a biller and a coder. And so I think that's probably a topic we need to dive into, at a later time, but it's such a part of not just the revenue cycle in your office, but such a part of practice management that is really just undervalued and lost. And it comes to play sometimes when people start complaining about their fee schedules and coverages and what they can and can't do. And I'm like, have you visited your contracts lately? So, and then some people don't even know how Medicaid works in their state.
I wanted to give a real example here of something you said, Terry. One of the things in the Medicare fee schedule proposal is the conversion factor. Now, many of our commercial insurances, they work off of the RVU system that is developed by Medicare, considering that conversion factor base pay. Now, the conversion factor is being proposed to go down 2.8% or 93 cents difference in the conversion factor. Let me give you just an off the top of my head example. If we lose $5 a day per patient and we see 20 patients a day, that's $100 a day at 52 weeks in a year. We're losing another FTE. I went to a conference last year where they broke down the conversion factor differences and showed us how that decrease in revenue is really removing the full-time employees that we need in our organization. If we lose another 2.8%, we're going to lose another full-time person. Think about how stressed you are already trying to manage the revenue cycle department and all the nuances within that department. A lot of practices are simply going fire to fire to fire to fire, putting things out. Now you're going to lose one of your firefighters. Commenting on the proposal is the only way that we can invoke change. Even if those comments don't affect the final conversion factor, those comments are going to be available to be viewed by Congress, who does come in every once in a while and throws us a bone. And we need that bone. We've consistently been having reductions to the conversion factor every single year. It's time that we stopped this madness. And we're only going to be able to do it through the comments. Go ahead, Terry.
Well, I mentioned some because I really wanted Sean to kind of address this because he's got a sterner voice than I do. Even though I can get mad, I would get so annoyed with this and I would get political, and I don't want to do that. Everybody knows my conservative choices, but Sean, look what I put in the chat. I know our listeners can't see that, but I know you know this. Maybe you can also speak to that because I think everyone's focused on the fee schedule reduction and they don't realize on top of that. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, so Terry mentioned about the sequestration and the debt ceiling that was increased during the Obama administration. And the fact is, this can has continuously been kicked down the road. And right now, it's supposed to, we were supposed to see these effects take place through 2030. Medicare Part B, you have the pay-go. There's 1.7 trillion in the Inflation Reduction Act under Biden-Harris 2021. This is going to hit the physician fee schedule as of 2025. So I think the point is, and Terry didn't want to get political.
We just can't afford 2.8%, not on top of all of that.
On top of the 2.8%. Yeah, I wanted Sean to say it in a way that was professional so I wouldn't scream at the computer.
Yeah, I don't
scream.
I don't know that I can. And here's the thing, and folks, you need to really think about this. And I tell people this all the time. Are we better off right now, 4 years later, than what we were in the prior 4 years? If you think we are, then okay, there's no problem with that. But if you believe that we are not, then a change has to take place. This industry cannot afford any further cuts to the physician fee schedules. We can't. The costs of operating a business have gone through the ceiling. Folks, I was a practice administrator for many years. I cut my teeth in practice administration. I was the chief administrator of a very big hospital in Atlanta for years. So I understand economics. I understand how supply chains work. I understand how, you have to have a balanced budget in order to be able to function. Hospitals love to run in the red for the majority of the year, and then Q4 miraculously we come into the black. But the bottom line is this: we cannot afford to lose any more providers. Think about this, okay? One, my very good friend who lives in North Carolina reached out to me last week and said, "Hey, my son's graduating with his degree in biology. He wants to go to medical school." And I told him that, you got to prepare to take the MCATs. And he said to me, "What do you mean the MCATs?" Medical schools are no longer requiring MCATs in many cases for the students to get in. I just read a study the other day. In 10 years, we will have no pediatricians in the United States because nobody is going into pediatric medicine. That is scary. That is scary. Folks, you have got to get your providers. It's not enough to gripe and complain. They've got to get involved, and they've got to come together as a collective group. But what we are facing right now, this Inflation Reduction Act has done nothing. And I know people were still saying, well, they got the inflation below 3%, or they got it to 3%. Folks, prior to the Biden administration, we were sub 1% inflation. We went to 9+% inflation over the last 4 years. So to say, well, they got it down to 3%, folks, we were sub 1% inflation. We can't afford a 2.8% hit. We can't afford a 1% hit. I have providers that are reaching out to me saying, "Sean, if I can't renegotiate my contract with Blue Cross Blue Shield, who's my biggest payer, I have to let more of my staff go." I have a group in, I won't say where, because they listen to my podcast, but I have a group that actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, if we can't renegotiate our contract with Aetna, we're going to have to let our folks go." There's nothing more we can do. And this is the reality of the situation that we're in, because we have allowed Congress to kick the can down the road till it can no longer be kicked. And people may not like what I'm saying, but at the end of the day, this is how the industry is working right now, or failing to work. So, all right, let's get
I was about to
into,
say, let's pivot to how to make the industry work.
So, in the last few minutes that I have, I want to engage Christine and Terry in this part of the conversation, because I think it's extremely important. We are coming into Q4, right? And coming into Q4, that means we need to be proactive. We need to be taking steps to ensure that the compliance program that we have built in our organization is functioning, that it is a living, breathing document. That's what I've called it for years. I know some say I've coined that phrase. Wonderful. I'm happy about that. I finally have a phrase. But it is a living, breathing document, which means it can't be static. It has to be audited. It has to be monitored, because the only way that we know something works is by reviewing it and making sure that what we are reviewing is in line with what is going on right now and what we should be expecting for the future. So a few things, and I made myself some notes. So I want to run through a few different things that I have with the ladies here. And for those of you that are, online on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook or X, feel free to put your comments in and I will look at those. All right. So first, obviously, when we're talking about compliance, we understand that it's crucial for medical organizations to have an effective compliance program because one, we have legal and regulatory requirements, right? Medical organizations operate in a heavily regulated environment. We are subject to numerous federal and state laws as well as regulations. Remember, a compliance program helps to ensure that your organization adheres to the statutes, acts, laws, regulations, including those that are tied specifically to billing, to patient privacy, to the anti-kickback statutes, and other things that are applicable. And again, by having an effective compliance program, this reduces the risk of legal violations and potential penalties. So to Christine and Terry, when you are engaging with your clients around the country, what is one of the first things that you are sharing with your clients on making certain that what's on paper translates to what is actually transpiring on a day in and day out basis into practice?
Christine, go ahead.
Thanks, Terry. So the first thing that I always ask is the obvious. How do you know you're doing it right? A lot of times I get those misconceptions of we got paid. Oh, but you know you can't keep the money, right? If that was paid in error, it doesn't belong to you. It's almost as if I said, oh, I accidentally sent you a QuickBooks invoice for 10 grand and you paid it. Thanks. Can I keep it? No, I can't keep it. But I always ask, how do you know? And that opens the door to say, that's what a compliance program does. We all gather around and we discuss what are some of those common risk areas. And if you don't know what they are, they were written 26 years ago by the OIG, still very pertinent. It's a great place to start with what's already been exposed and to say, what is our policy on following this rule? And then more importantly, show me that you're following it. And from there, you can continue to build. But I think that's where it starts. How do you know? What is the expectation? And are we following it?
Yep.
Right. And then what I do is I say, who first, all those things that Christine said. And then I said, and who's in charge of it? Who's in charge of your compliance? Making sure somebody's complying with their compliance. Right. And then what are the ramifications or the consequences for not following compliance? That's a really big key. I have a lot of practices that say, well, we have a compliance plan and they do this, kind of, sort of, or even if they have one, I remember one in particular, a practice that I audit every year for the last 10 years, and the same doctor has the same failed audit. And I said, at some point, you're going to have to make sure that is this doctor still getting paid? Why is he still allowed to participate in payroll? I said, I don't understand, because he's not doing what he's supposed to do.
Yep. So
we said it during our little break together.
Yeah.
You can't afford a compliance program. Oh, okay. So you can't afford the Christine and Terry few $100 compliance program, but I bet you're going to come up with the money for Sean's $30,000 or $40,000 defense program because you couldn't find the money for the compliance program.
Right. Well, and there, just a little thing. One of the things that I noticed that many practices right now are struggling with are the care management services and how to do that. Well, for those of you out there, I'm going to give a commercial message to Christine here. Go to her website at Sterling Global Solutions. She's got a wonderful compliance online book for the care management services. I got it myself. It's very good. And at least have that in your hands so you can read through it and say, okay, now we know where to start. And I know Sean has compliance modules, so know where to start. I have them on critical care and certain things for cardio. So you want to make sure that you at least have a written start somewhere. And Christine mentioned the OIG rules. And Sean, when were those? Weren't they just recently updated? Was it 2022, 2023?
Yeah. So we
In
saw
2023.
multiple we saw multiple updates. The last ones were in June of 2023 under
Yeah.
the evaluation for corporate compliance programs by the DOJ.
They
But
gave us 7, right? Yeah, 7
yeah,
updates.
so you all brought up a very interesting point, and that was where I was going next, which is enhancing accountability. So again, compliance programs establish clear policies and procedures for managing compliance issues. They look at our mechanisms for reporting and investigating potential violations. It allows us to create a framework for accountability and helps to ensure that corrective actions are taken when necessary. So going back to what Christine and Terry were talking about just a couple of moments ago, why are we continuing to allow this provider to get paid for things that he or she is not entitled to? That's what we're talking about by creating the framework for accountability, enhancing accountability. I have prosecutors that will ask me all the time, Sean, how many times in your expert regulatory compliance opinion should they allow an issue to happen before they fix it? And my answer is always once. But if you have a corporate compliance program that is a proactive approach, that once usually never happens because we have educated our employees. We have given them guidance. We have ensured that they are understanding what is and what is not appropriate behavior. So that's one of the things to having a corporate compliance program. A couple of last things that I want to point out is one, people don't realize how much morale and culture changes when you have a strong compliance program in place, because it creates a culture of integrity. It creates a culture of ethical behavior within your organization, and it helps your employees understand the importance of compliance, and it encourages them to report any unethical, illegal, or potentially problematic behavior that may exist. And the last thing that I'll say is that the main reason why we incorporate a compliance program into our organization is because the programs themselves are designed to prevent, detect, and respond to instances of fraud and abuse. They allow us an opportunity to establish procedures for identifying and addressing potential fraudulent activities, which ultimately protects the organization from financial loss and, more importantly, in my opinion, reputational damage. So we are coming into Q4. This is the time we're looking at everything that transpired during the current year becomes critical so that we don't carry forward into the next year bad habits, so that anything that we identified as a risk in 2023 or in 2024 can be mitigated going into 2025. Boy, I'm still behind. So take the time and listen. I agree. I hate how you guys put it, how expensive I am. Come on, it's all relative. But it is critical, because I do tell people all the time, you could either spend a little bit of money up front now, or you could spend a whole bunch of money on the back end. But it shouldn't come down to pinching pennies, because too often I find providers tripping over dollars to pick up dimes. But what's more important to me, because people can recover from a financial catastrophe, from a financial issue, from having to make an overpayment. You can recover from that. What you can't recover from in a reasonable period of time is reputational damage, reputational harm, because it takes a lifetime to build a reputation. It only takes minutes to destroy it. All right. I'll give Christine and Terry the last word.
I'm good. I think that was a great way to end it.
All right.
Well, when you were talking, Sean, you reminded me of every trip to the airport. If you see something, say something. I think what we don't realize is compliance is not that department on the 6th floor. Compliance affects each and every one of us. If you show up to work and there's a padlock on the door, it's really affected you. And you could have said something that may have made the difference. So.
Excellent. All right. That's going to do it for this episode of the Compliance Guy Monday Auditing, Coding, and Compliance Roundtable. I want to say thank you to Christine Hall and Terry Fletcher for always taking time out of their busy schedules. I want to say thank you to each and every single one of you who tunes in, logs on, and hangs out with us. Thank you so much for helping keep this program relevant, keep us going. We appreciate it. Don't forget, check in on Terry's website, on Christine's website. You can always follow me on thecomplianceguy.com. I am back after my 2-week break from my Alaska trip, so I've got lots of content that I'm going to be putting out here over the next several days. We're going to be doing some daily doses and a few other things, so stay tuned for that. Terry and I, our episode will be airing tomorrow on It's As Clear as Mud. We hope that you'll tune in tomorrow. So until then, remember, be good to yourself, but more importantly, y'all be good to each other. Take care.